If you could give parents of kids with ADHD just one piece of sleep advice, what would it be?
I'm gonna have to cheat and give two.
Welcome back to the Sleep Podcast for this episode on what nobody tells you about sleep and ADHD. We're going to talk about why standard advice fails so often, the blueprints that actually changes everything. If we have parents listening, we're going to discuss strategies to help our kids go through sleep. We have with us Dr. Melissa Moore. Melissa, it's a real pleasure to have you. So let's dive right in. Melissa, you've worked in sleep medicine for over a decade, supporting both children and adults with complex sleep challenges. And then ADHD became part of your life very personally. That experience changed the way you think about sleep.
So I had been working in the sleep field for about 10 years before I had my own children. And one of my kids was born and he is neurodiverse. He does have ADHD and sleep problems. So I was seeing it from both sides. And I think what that did, number one, it gave me more empathy and a different perspective on how hard the things that we ask families to do really are. From a scientific perspective, things didn't change. That foundation is still the same, and my advice generally is pretty similar. But I think another thing that I learned is that really these recommendations have to be flexible and they have to be really tailored to the person and the family, and that sometimes we might need to go a step further beyond typical sleep recommendations.
100%. I hear you. So why is sleep such a persistent challenge for people with ADHD?
There are a lot of reasons why sleep can be more challenging. There's biology, just a different wiring in the brain, and that impacts sleep. Also, there's this delay of the circadian rhythm. We all have a clock in our brains that's internally generated by our bodies. And in people with ADHD, that is a little bit more delayed. So things like when melatonin is released are a little bit more delayed, and they make it harder to fall asleep. There are also things that occur alongside ADHD that are more common in people with ADHD that interfere with sleep. So anxiety, depression, stress, and sleep disorders. Things that are more common in people with ADHD are the restless sleep disorders. So restless leg syndrome and periodic limb movement disorder. Restless leg syndrome is you get a weird feeling and urge to move your legs, and that happens when you're awake. It's happening when you're trying to fall asleep and trying to get back to sleep. And then periodic limb movements are things that happen during sleep that wake up your brain. So both of those are more common in people with ADHD.
Very clear explanation. Many people with ADHD feel like they've tried everything. Why does traditional, sleep treatment often doesn't work for them?
Yeah, I think traditional sleep recommendations, so sleep hygiene, good sleep habits, they're still necessary, but often they're not quite enough, especially for parents out there. This isn't a result of bad behavior or poor willpower. It's really biology. And so falling asleep, staying asleep, that is more difficult, even if you have the perfect sleep habits. So it's still going to take a little bit longer, and it might be a little bit harder to wind down. And that's how it is. So we have to address those things. And like I said, going beyond those typical recommendations.
Okay. Would you say, for example, that, they assume some kind of, general sleep advice usually assume some kind of pattern or like predictability, which is a bit different when it comes to ADHD. How would you point out, if I can say this, the general difference?
I think we have to be more flexible. So again, the foundation is the same or similar. We have to be consistent in those pieces that really matter. But when it comes to things that don't, like what kind of sound machine do you want, pink noise versus brown noise, what kind of light, those things don't matter so much unless the person really likes those things. So if you really like to fall asleep with water sounds, go for it. So I think we just have to be a little bit more individualized.
Could you maybe give us what's the main difference supporting sleep in general in terms of actual techniques? What would you recommend supporting sleep when ADHD is in the picture?
One thing that is really interesting to me that I've learned over the years is that the right amount of distraction when you're falling asleep is key. So there's nothing we can do to force sleep except anesthesia. You can try as hard as you want, take whatever medications, whatever techniques, but you can't force it. All we can do is set up the right conditions decisions and wait. And during that waiting time is when I see people with ADHD really struggling for a few reasons. Number one, they get distracted and their brains are just working differently, generating new ideas, thinking about the next day. And so one thing that really helps is distraction. And there are plenty of ideas out there. One research-backed idea is called the cognitive shuffle. And it's where you think of a word like bedtime, and then you think of everything you can that starts with B. So blueberry, baseball, bed, those kinds of things. And when you can't think of anything else, you go to the next letter. So elephant, eggplant, egg. And then when you can't think of anything else that starts with E, you go on to D. It has to be distracting enough that it engages the brain. That's why counting sheep doesn't work. It doesn't even work for little kids. So you need something that really engages the brain enough to wind down enough to allow sleep to come.
And basically direct your attention to something specific. There's something that I love in your book, and you mentioned right now, is you talk about waiting for sleep, actually, rather than trying to sleep. I think that's a super interesting concept.
Language is really important, and even as parents, and I still do this, and I do this for a living, I still say try to go to sleep at times, and then I catch myself. But like I said, there's nothing we can do to force ourselves to sleep. And so when I hear people say, I'm trying so hard to fall asleep, I know that that's part of the problem. The trying, the effort is really counter to what needs to happen to sleep.
How do you define healthy sleep for someone with ADHD, realistically?
Healthy sleep, you can find the recommended hours in a lot of reputable medical places. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, they do provide a recommended number of hours of sleep. For adults, it's generally 6 to 10. However, I think that it's a better representation and more accurate to look at really how you're functioning or how your kids are functioning. Do you wake up on your own, or do you feel like you got hit by a truck when your alarm goes off? Do you feel like you have to nap during the day? Are you falling asleep during the day? Really, I think functioning is a better representation. Now, with that being said, I hear from powerful leaders even that they get 4 hours of sleep per night and that's enough for them. And they might say that, but we have no idea what they would be like if they actually got 8 hours of sleep. Maybe they would be able to cultivate world peace. We don't know. When someone is getting 4 hours of sleep a night, I'll say that's not enough. But within that general time of 6 to 10 hours, I really think just look at functioning. For kids, it's a little bit different, so they need a little bit more sleep, but the same thing. Are they falling asleep at school? Are they falling asleep during their therapies? Do they pass out on the way home from school on the bus? I would look at those things.
So basically, the level at which people function should be enough without really looking into achieving perfect sleep. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think by functioning, I mean, if your sleepiness is interfering with your everyday life, then it's a problem. And if it's not, then I don't think people need to track it as much. They don't need to spend as much time keeping their special watch or ring or whatever device people are using to track it. That I think is actually not very helpful.
I totally agree. I mean, we've seen that it creates sometimes a lot of anxiety, and it's very often counterproductive, especially when we have sleep problems.
To be that the people who could benefit from tracking their sleep are not tracking their sleep, and the people that are hyper attuned and aware of their sleep, and that again goes back to the trying to fall asleep, they don't need to be tracking their sleep, and tracking their sleep can interfere with falling asleep easily and quickly.
I'm a big believer of that. Could you tell us a bit about sleep association, something that you also touched upon, and why ADHD brains tend to build unhelpful ones?
Sleep associations are not all bad. There are good ones, and then there are some that are unhelpful. Our brains like to take shortcuts, and so they make connections. For example, we should connect the bed or wherever we sleep with sleep. When you do other things in your bed, or you're in your bed for long periods of time awake, your association becomes awake with bed. And that is the main thing that we see in adults and why they then have more insomnia. In kids, it's the same concept, but just a little bit different. So however you fall asleep, however your child falls asleep, whether it's with a bottle or a blanket or the TV or being rocked, that is the sleep association. And the other thing about sleep associations is they're present all night long. They're not just present at falling asleep. And so I see lots and lots of families where the difficulty is night waking. They don't so much see falling asleep as the problem. But the thing is that the night wakings directly relate to the sleep associations you have at bedtime. So we all go through, as you know, sleep stages. We all have light sleep, then we go into deep sleep, then we go into dream sleep or REM sleep, and then our brains wake up. And at each of those wakings, we need to be able to get ourselves right back to sleep. Most of us are so good at that, we don't even know it happened. I don't remember waking up 4 to 6 times last night, and that's a good thing. But whatever you first have to fall asleep at bedtime, whatever that environment is, needs to be the same all night long, or it's harder to get back to sleep during those night wakings. Now, that doesn't mean that your child or you are going to wake up after every sleep cycle and know that you are awake. It's not really a one-to-one relationship, but your child is more likely to wake up during the night if they don't have what they had when they fell asleep.
Okay, super interesting. ADHD comes with a lot of daytime exhaustion, right? How do you think about naps?
I think there are a few ways to look at it. There are two processes that turn on sleep for our brains. And one is the circadian clock, the clock in our brain that is based on light and dark. You should feel sleepy when it's dark, not so much when it's light. And that second process is called sleep pressure, and that is just what it sounds like. So when you wake up in the morning, you shouldn't really need sleep. Your need for sleep is building and building and building throughout the day, and then you get to a certain threshold. And in combination with your circadian clock, that puts you into sleep. When you take a nap or sleep in, it takes away that sleep pressure. And so you might not be ready to fall asleep at your typical bedtime. Sometimes I see kids, especially, high school and college kids that are in sports that have really early practices, and maybe they take a 20-minute nap and they still can fall asleep, no problem. I think that's okay. But if you're having any sort of trouble falling asleep at night, there should be no daytime sleep. You can rest, but just not actually sleep.
Could close your eyes for a few minutes, but
for a minute, but don't let yourself get into sleep. I think we, especially with kids, we have so many thoughts about not doing electronics or when to do electronics. If your child needs some downtime, it's a good time to have that half-hour show, or maybe do that half hour of coloring or something like that.
Okay, rather than sleeping. It's a way to
the sleeping is the only thing that can take away sleep pressure. And so on one hand, that relates to things that generally adults try to do to overcome sleep pressure, like with driving. If we try to turn music up or, open the windows or anything like that, it doesn't really help. The only thing that can help that sleepiness is getting sleep. The other side of that coin is that sleep pressure is taken away by sleeping. And so I hear about this all the time, that parents will say she fell asleep for 10 minutes in the car and then it took her 2 hours to fall asleep. So that taking away a little bit of sleep pressure can have an impact on falling asleep.
Interesting. So you're even against the power naps, like even the 15, 20
I'm not
minutes?
against them if people are not having trouble falling asleep. So if you don't have insomnia, or there's a period of time where you're okay falling asleep at your normal time, then I'm not against it at all. But if you are having trouble, I think it's good to get all those things kind of tightened up. And one of the things that can help with that is not napping, not sleeping in super late, those kinds of things.
So we touched upon this a little bit at the beginning, but I would like to come back a bit on the idea of why is it so important to both calm and occupy the mind at the same time while waiting for sleep, especially for ADHD.
I think that especially for people with ADHD, they need a level of busyness or distraction in their brain in order to be calm enough for sleep to arrive, for them to allow sleep to come. Our brains have to be engaged just enough that we were able to let that happen. They also have to be calm. So, and those two things go together. I always tell kids that the best brain is calm and busy, and those two things might seem like opposites, but actually you want your body to be calm. You don't want to be worrying. And so for adults, that distraction can help us not to worry so much about the next day or what we're going to have for dinner, what we should have bought at the supermarket.
But usually decide to come out at night, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think those things, keeping yourself distracted is important. There are two parts to falling asleep. There's the calming down part, and then there's the actually falling asleep part, which is like lights out, eyes closed, getting from that point to a sleep. And I think what you do during the calming down period can be a little bit flexible. If there's a calm show that you want to watch, okay. If there's listening to a calming podcast helps you, okay. I would say you can be flexible during that time, whatever really helps you calm down. When you get to the point where it's eyes closed, lights out, it's a good idea not to have really anything that's not going to be there all night long. Because again, you're developing those sleep associations, and you want to have sleep associations that are helpful. Again, for kids, for example, lying down with a parent, a lot of parents don't mind lying down with their kids at all at bedtime, but then they hear them during the night wakings because kids can't really get themselves back to sleep without that lying down. And the part about that makes the association unhelpful is not that it's happening. If you're intentionally co-sleeping, there's no problem with that. But if you don't want to be getting up through the night with your child, then that's when that lying down becomes a problem at bedtime.
Alongside your clinical work, you're also a parent, and you've lived these sleep challenges at home with your own child. You're currently writing a book focused on sleep and neurodivergent kids, coming out in March, right? March 4th.
Coming out March 4th. It's called The Good Sleep Guide for Neurodivergent Kids, and it combines my professional experience. As I said, I was doing this for a decade before I had kids, and it's been another decade since then. So it combines my professional experience with all of the resources that I could put together, and then my personal experience. So there are flexible adaptations that I have had to make that I never thought I would make as a parent. But, we're balancing a lot of things as parents, and just as people. We are balancing so many things at one time. I think sleep is really an important thing to prioritize, but we also have to fit it into our real lives.
Which gets me to this next point. In your book, you actually talk a lot about, this idea of balancing, what you call balancing the sleep ideal with their family's reality. What does that actually mean in practice?
So I think in general, we know what ideal habits are. We know we should floss our teeth every day. We know we're supposed to reapply sunscreen every 2 hours. It's fitting it in that's the challenge. And similarly, I think most people understand that kids should have a bedtime, that they should have a bedtime routine, that we should have our own bedtime and bedtime routine, but fitting it into our real life is where the challenge is. And if it's not perfect, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do anything. Even science shows us that a bedtime routine 3 nights is better than a bedtime routine no nights. It's okay to not be perfect. None of us are. I do this for a living, and my sleep habits are certainly not perfect all the time. So really figuring out how can we do the best that we can given the life that we have.
If you could give parents of kids with ADHD just one piece of sleep advice, what would it be? We had to leave with one takeaway. What would it be?
I'm going to have to cheat and give 2. The first one is find your people. Find social support, whether that's online or in your community, in different groups. It's hard to be a person with ADHD, and it's hard to be a parent of a child with ADHD. And I think it's so critical for sleep to find other people that are going through what you're going through. So that's my first piece. But since it isn't exactly sleep related, my second piece of advice is to have a bedtime and a bedtime routine. And sometimes that's the only thing you can do. That's the only sleep habit that you can do consistently. But try to go to bed within a half hour or so of the same time every night, and try to have a couple of things that you do that are the same every night before bed.
In order to build those associations.
And to wind down your brain. And when we're driving, we don't get to wait to get to the stop sign to slow down. We have to slow down before we get there. And our brains are the same way with sleep. We can't be revved up and turn off the lights and expect to fall asleep like that. It doesn't work that way. So a bedtime routine is what helps that winding down. And it might be something like change your clothes, brush your teeth, turn your light off.
But
if you can do a few things every night, it's a good idea.
Okay, great. Well, listening to you, it really reinforces something we care a lot at Sleep. That sleep improves when support adapts to the person rather than asking the person to adapt to more rigid models.
Right.
Anyways, thank you so much, Melissa, for bringing both your clinical clinical expertise and your personal experience into this conversation. It's been incredibly insightful. Anyone listening, just reiterating that Melissa has a book coming out in March.
March 4th, it's coming out, and there's also other information resources on my website, which is drmelissamore.com, DRMELISA, 1S, MOORE, 2Os.com.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us. And yeah, it was a really meaningful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.